Welcome to CPF Fire Wire, a podcast from California professional firefighters where we discuss a wide range of issues affecting firefighters, our unions, our families, and the communities we serve.
Hello and welcome to the CPF Fire Wire. I'm Brian Rice. I'm the president of the California Professional Firefighters and your host. When it comes to the issues that affect your life on the job as a firefighter, the most important decisions are made in Sacramento. Your local union contract will determine what you get in pay and benefits and working conditions, but everything else that you get to ask for is determined by laws made in Sacramento at the Capitol, and our legislature plays a big hand in that, as does the governor. And this past week closed the book on the latest two-year session of our legislation, and I'm very proud to say that the CPF and your legislative team once again had a very successful legislative session advocating on behalf of all members of the California professional firefighters. We won some major legislative victories in the area of workers' compensation, health and safety, and paramedic licensing reform. We also killed some legislation that could have had a very negative impact on your rights to bargain while on the job as a firefighter. And today we're going to take a look back at what was accomplished for our members in Sacramento and also discuss why this work matters to you, our firefighters in the field. Joining me today on the Firewire is the best governmental advocacy team in the business. And between Doug and Meagan Subers, they have been working on behalf of firefighters for close to 2 decades, 20 years. Last year, when our longtime advocate, Christy Bauma, went to work as the governor's legislative director, Doug and Meagan took charge and delivered for our members in ways that we're going to talk about here, but I am eternally grateful for having them on the team and being able to work with them through this last legislative session. So Doug and Meagan, thank you so much for joining us today on the CPF Firewire.
Thank you for having us, Brian.
Thank you.
I think what I'd like to start with, I'd like to have you start by telling us a little bit about the legislative team's work, who is all part of that team, and the scope of what you do, not only on behalf of firefighters, but the volume of issues that you track for us and how that tracking takes place throughout the year.
Yeah, I think, Brian, I'll just jump in and then Meagan can certainly add. Thanks again for having us today. I think, it's an honor to work on behalf of the CPF and be part of the CPF legislative team. And that team is myself, Meagan, and also Brittany Trudeau, who's CPF's legislative director. And we work as a team, but the entire team at the CPF from you, Secretary Treasurer Lopez, executive board, and the entire staff all really work together to push forward a legislative agenda that benefits firefighters and their families in California. And so, when we talk about the legislature and legislation each year, there's really kind of three phases, which you've touched on a little bit in the lead-in. First, there are certainly the bills which CPF sponsors or co-sponsors, and that's really the proactive legislation that we work on to benefit the lives and working conditions of members across the state. And then the second kind of element is the state budget, which is a huge effort every year to bring together a state budget, which has expenditures that in areas that are important to our to firefighters across the state. And really can help support local firefighters, state firefighters, and others and improve their working conditions or operations of state government. And then the third segment or portion of our work is really focused on looking at bills that are introduced each year by legislators on issues across the board and really assessing them and how they impact firefighters. And maybe Meagan can talk a little bit about how we review those bills, and then, as we meet with you every week, Brian, how we kind of go through those bills and determine positions and direction.
Sure. Thanks, Doug. So, there are thousands of bills introduced in the state legislature each year in each session, and we have a process internally where every day during bill introduction time, which is usually typically January, February, or into early March of each year, the legislative team, myself, Doug, Brittany, we do sort of a first pass at every single bill that's introduced. We look for impacts to our members. any impact to the job of a firefighter in California, we flag. We take sort of a deeper dive on the policy issue in the bill. We contact the legislative office that's authored the bill. We ask for background. And once we sort of collect that information, we bring it to President Rice for review and discussion. And that is typically how we, set abound our engagement on any issue outside of our sponsored and co-sponsored legislation. So we sit down with President Rice on a weekly basis, mostly for the most part, to review bills that have been introduced or amended, and talk about the impacts to our members. And then with direction from President Rice, that will determine our engagement with that member, with that office, with those sponsors of that bill, and determine how we engage to suggest changes to the language of the bill, take a position on the bill as it moves forward through the process. So that's just like a little bit of background into our annual review of bills that are introduced and amended each year.
When you start out, you're looking at thousands of bills. You guys track those and you keep track of them. How does that go through your tracking process to make sure it stays fresh and in front of you guys for action if needed?
So the internal process that we have on the Ledge team is in a tracking system we use that Capital Community uses called Capital Track. And we put certain flags in the system that sort of put them on a list for us so that we have them at our fingertips anytime we need to pull up any bill we're tracking with certain flags, like we need follow-up, we're waiting for follow-up, we've requested a meeting, those kinds of things. That's sort of just our internal process that we have to make sure we're not dropping any balls on our end in terms of those bills that we are waiting for more information on, or we're contacting a relevant department or agency to ask for information, or we're checking with you for feedback. So that's just a little bit of the technical behind the scenes process.
As a local union president, I'm used to, if I got to bash the city manager, that's what I'm going to do. That doesn't work like that at the Capitol. There are too many moving parts. There is just a different level, and it's very intricate. And talk to me about how words matter. And even, I know I've learned lessons with you all. And if you want to bring one up, I'm fine with that. But words matter.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point, Brian. Like, I think, there's always so many bills and so much activity that you're going to, engage with the legislator, on Monday, encouraging them to, consider voting for a bill that's important to CPF. And that's on Monday. And on Tuesday, they may be on another committee and they may be considering a bill that is also, important to or supported by CPF or opposed by CPF. And you really have to think about how you maintain relationships with these legislators, how you always, give them, try to educate them with clear evidence on why a bill makes sense or doesn't make sense, really help them understand what it's like for a firefighter in the field, and also recognize that these legislators are dealing, with thousands of bills and hundreds of issues and tons of people like us for other interests that are before them. There's always a lot of stakeholders. There's stakeholders in the labor family that you have to continually maintain relationships with, leaders of all the other unions in the California Labor Federation and elsewhere, and then also other stakeholders, employers, local government employers, insurers, environmental groups that are worried about forest management, medical system, whether it's the hospitals or other EMS system stakeholders. So there's always, a lot of stakeholders that you're trying to understand where they all are and maintain strong relationships with them, because one day you may be disagreeing on something, but the next day you may need to work together to solve a problem for our members. So I think it's a really good point, Brian, about just needing to always think about what you're saying, always think about who you're talking to and how to, say things in a clear and concise way, and be consistent.
September 30th marked the formal end of the 2021-22 legislative session. And over that session, over 5,000 bills were introduced. CPF had 11 that were passed and signed. And if that's okay, I'd like to focus on two of those major priority bills as we move through the podcast. Governor Newsom signed Senate 1127. That's for our members facing job-related cancer or other presumptive illnesses. This is huge because it cracks down on the cruel and abusive practices of not only employers, but workers' comp administrators. And I had the opportunity to personally testify before two legislative committees in support of 1127. Doug, can you walk us through the specifics of 1127, what it does, how it will help our members who are dealing with endless workers' compensation fights? Just kind of put a template over that on how this can help us.
Just from the outset, you were hearing from members in the field, whether it's through field operations or through local presidents or vice presidents, of just the experiences our members were having where, they would have job-caused cancer or job-caused heart disease, and we're dealing with denials and then they're not only fighting their job-caused illness, but they're fighting a system that should be there to protect them, help them get healthy, and help them get back on the job. And so what this bill really does is it, under current law, the employer has 90 days to determine whether your workers' compensation claim was compensable. For presumptive injuries, this bill expedites that decision-making to 75 days. We hope this will put more focus on presumptive illnesses and applications to access the workers' compensation system and get decisions quicker so our members can get treatment and get back on the job. The second major element of the bill was to reinstitute some strong penalties to provide an incentive to employers, insurers, third-party administrators to prevent unreasonable denials of claims. These presumptions, the legislature for some of them decades has determined that these are job caused unless there's evidence to the contrary, and it should be unreasonable if there's no evidence and something is just denied just because, and then there's a time for an individual firefighter to fight an entire system. So we really hope it'll ensure that there's new focus and attention paid to the presumptions, and firefighters are able to access care, get treatment, and get back on the job. And then the last issue, which I know we'll talk a little bit more about, is just about temporary disability. Under current law, you have 104 weeks of temporary disability. SB 1127, when it goes into effect January 1st, will increase that for presumptive cancer to 240 weeks and take away an existing timeline that you had to use temporary disability in 5 years from the first day you were injured. And we have members that unfortunately have recurrences of cancer, and it's important that temporary disability is there for them as they're trying to, battle a disease and engage in a fight with a job-caused illness that they're going to win and get back on the job.
And I want to expand even a little bit further on the temporary disability piece. Meagan, we had some very compelling testimony, not just mine, but Lieutenant Magali Sadie from the San Francisco firefighters. She literally is ground zero for that added portion, the disability portion. Meagan, would you touch on that a little bit?
Lieutenant Sadie was amazing. We Local 798 brought this issue to us on her behalf when she was faced with a reoccurrence of her breast cancer. And she was timed out from using any more of her temporary disability. So thankfully, she had been on the job long enough to have accrued enough of her own sick leave to be able to use when she had to be out of work to get a second cancer surgery. The impetus behind this change just made it for a really strong argument that nobody could really contend with, which thankfully was the case. And so I think that, this will go a long way for our members who unfortunately are faced with the reoccurrence of a same cancer diagnosis. And we're hopeful, we're always hopeful that none of our members have to use it, but for the hopefully very limited number of cases, it will be available to them.
This piece of that legislation is as much of a blessing to the men and women on this job as the penalties and the lowering the timeline. And I'm super thankful, Doug and Meagan, to you guys as a legislative team, to Magali and members that along the way that brought this to the importance of us and how we had to deal with it. Conversely, let's talk a little bit about what some of our opponents or opposition may have been doing and saying while we were trying to get this to the goal line.
A lot of the opposition arguments were things like, how are you going to reduce the timeline to 75 days for the investigatory period? Employers aren't even meeting the 90 days. To me, that's a red flag. If you're already not meeting the current law requirement of the 90-day investigatory, then maybe we don't need a timeline if you're not going to meet one. One of their arguments was there's no evidence that the firefighter got their illness or their cancer or their presumption on the job. That was probably, to me, I was personally most offended by that argument, because that is not how presumptions work. We do not have to provide the employer evidence that we got cancer, got heart disease, any of our presumptions. That is the whole point of a presumption. So we don't have to provide that evidence. And that was probably, like I said, the one I was most offended about. They raised concerns and issues with the unreasonableness standard. So the penalties, a judge can determine that penalties are appropriate if there was an unreasonable denial of a claim. They wanted to define what it meant to be unreasonable, and we had to be really pretty assertive that that is a legal term of art. It is well defined in case law. Judges have it within their authority to determine what's unreasonable. What got us over the hump and what really convinced people, what really convinced legislators and the administration was having the number of examples and cases that we had, being able to query our members early on in the year and ask them to connect us with their workers' compensation attorneys, who were able to provide us with lists of cases and examples that they had where the injured firefighter was drugged through a horrible multi-year-long process, and then eventually approved. Because that was another thing that the opposition would say. Well, these are always normally, over 90% approved. But what they don't talk about, because nobody tracks this information, which is another actual smaller piece of this bill that actually may go a long way, nobody tracks that first initial determination right now. The state does not track if the claim was initially accepted or initially denied and then later accepted. They only track that final determination. So the employers were able to say 90% of these are approved, but we don't know how long that firefighter was sitting there languishing through the process because they were initially denied. So I think being able to educate the legislature about what presumptions are and having specific examples of injured firefighters to talk to them about really, I think, was the winner for us. And again, on the TD portion, having someone like Lieutenant Sadie be able to talk about her experience was the game changer for us.
And here's what's sad. We didn't have to go or look too hard to find members with cancer diagnoses, whether they're in treatment, they're cancer-free. There's just a lot of those tragic stories out there. My simple question to an insurer, a third-party administrator, this is a 40-year-old presumptive. So what do you have that you're going to be able to refute this with? Because that's your job, not ours. If you don't have anything, these okays should take place in 5 days or less. That's my opinion. And that's what we need to be driving home on our workers' comp counterparts. You don't need 90 freaking days on a cancer diagnosis. This law has been in play for 40 years. You either have it or you don't. The deal is you don't have it. You know that these cancers are caused by the job, and what you're doing is trying to save the money, but you're really costing the employer. So I'm really happy about where we're at with 1127. And now the second part of it, at least for the CPF piece, now we need to tune in and how to educate the members on properly using that to get the end results that we're all looking for. In the first year of the session, we were able to get another major victory in the area of paramedic discipline and licensing on AB 450. And this bill balances the scales for firefighter paramedics and paramedics who are subject to unreasonable or over punitive discipline at the hands of the state or local EMS agencies. Can you guys tell us a little bit, not only about what this bill does, but how we believe it'll make that process fairer for our members, and the effort to get it to the governor's desk? and the amount of work that it took in advocacy to do that.
Yeah, Brian, happy to. I think this is definitely, an issue when we heard you talk about it, representing paramedics that, went through discipline process at their department and then had discipline happen at EMSA, and other individual members that went through experiences like this. But it really showed that we needed to have a system that was fair, a system where peers, other paramedics, were part of the decision making, and just have a system that is like a lot of the other allied health professions and the licensing bodies that they have, and kind of from that perspective, we work together with Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez, who is now left the assembly, but is the chair of the California Labor Federation, or executive secretary, I believe is her formal title. And she really took the lead in working with us to say the State Emergency Medical Services Authority should have a disciplinary review board that is made up of individual practitioners in the field who are paramedics, emergency room physician, and some public members, to really have a system to adjudicate final determinations of discipline on a paramedic, and really, be able to talk about the facts and make a determination. And I think so. This bill will have, a 7-member board that is still in the process of being appointed, but appointed by the governor, the Senate Rules Committee, and the Speaker of the Assembly. And it will be made up of 4 paramedics, an ER physician who is not someone who works at a LEMSA medical director or fire department medical director, and then 2 public members who don't have anything to do with the EMS system, to really give some balance to a board to fairly consider and adjudicate claims. And the second big major part, Brian, that as you really push for, is to have this board look at what the structure of the model disciplinary orders are, and really look at how do we have progressive discipline. Many times our members are, there's an issue in the field, their department takes consideration of that, provides systems for more training for medics in the field, or determines when something was a case of a medic being on many continuous shifts, and really set up a system where all those things are considered if the licensing body is considering that. So I think that's another big thing that will be really set up the structure of how paramedics are any disciplinary things that are brought forward are considered.
Not everything goes through the first try or the second session or the third. If you look at community paramedicine, that was an ongoing piece of work for several sessions. Senator Leva's bill on disallowed compensation through CalPERS was the same thing. When a bill doesn't get signed right away, we end up doing one of 2 things. You either put it through and get it vetoed, or you strongly consider pulling it and not putting it through. Sometimes the issue is not ready to go all the way.
I think that's part of the effective strategy you've implemented, Brian, in all of our legislation. And I think we can use SB 278 probably as our most recent successful example. So SB 278 was our bill, Senator Leva's bill that CPF sponsored, working with CalPERS, dealing with disallowed compensation. Retired firefighters, just a handful that we know of, were starting to get notified post-retirement that they had disallowed compensation included in their retirement allowance, and that they were going to owe, lump sums of money back to PERS, and then, reduce their retirement going forward. So I think we worked over, Doug's gonna have to help me out here, 3 different bills were introduced with Senator Leva over the last handful of years, trying to get at this issue. And SB 278, was a product of multiple years working with the author, working with CalPERS, working with the employers who were the opposition, trying to find the right balance. We try to do as much engagement in advance with the administration, with all the impacted agencies. Again, in this case, it was CalPERS, working with the governor's office, with the relevant policy consultants in the governor's office to try to find the right balance. And at one point they just said, we're not there yet. We're not sure we're comfortable with the solution you've put forward to date. We need more time. And I think Sometimes if you feel like, we have enough leeway, that it's at least a discussion, a consideration that President Rice and the board, with some of our guidance, will try to determine if it's the right time to push pause. The legislative session is a defined period of time. And sometimes if you can't come to that resolution between January and September, January and August, when the bills are sent down to the governor and you're in the middle of a 2-year session, sometimes it makes sense to just put it on hold. It's not dead. It's still very much alive. You can come back in January, finish up any remaining negotiations. And even in the interim, in the fall, you can continue those negotiations so that when you come back in January, you can work with the author and the relevant stakeholders and the governor's office to ensure a successful, a bill is successful when it makes it. You don't ever know. You never know 100%. You can work with all the relevant impacted agencies and stakeholders in governor's office every day for a year, and you still don't ever know for sure. But it at least gives you some sense, I think, of comfortability that you've put in as many hours as you possibly could to try to find a workable solution that still protects your members and still is implementable for this state, which I think is what ended up happening with SB 278. And why it ended up being successful after multiple tries, but again, being able to push that pause button, keep working on it, and then send it down.
I'm going to touch on AB 1993, which was a vaccination mandate, and our strong opposition here. It wasn't so much that it was a vaccination mandate, although that goes against what our position has been on vaccine. It was really, when you stopped and looked at it, it was a gutting of the meet and confer process in the state of California. And that was one of the things that we discussed, not only with the author, but you had me, and we reached out to every member of the labor committee. And the issue in itself, we all know how polarizing vaccines and COVID and everything is. Put that off to the side. It was the discussion on our core values to make something like that mandatory when almost every local in the state, with the exception of a couple, had an agreement that they were working by and behind, and it was working. And that would have thrown all of it out the window. Collective bargaining is a cornerstone of the union movement, and a bill like this not only would inhibit our ability to collectively bargain over an issue like this, it would cut it out. And it's a core value. And that is what really hit with legislators. This is California, and we have an expectation that we have a right to bargain.
I think what you said is probably the reason why we were able to get to the end result that we got, is that we were focused on the policy implications of the proposal. The issue is so hot button, so sensitive, the issue of vaccines. And so, I think it's appropriate to have some of that be discussed. But I think the fact that you were able to focus and have us focus on the policy implications of the proposal going forward and the precedent setting it would have to circumvent the local collective bargaining process with a mandate like this is really why we were able to, why the bill didn't move forward, because of CPF's engagement on that point and some of the other public safety groups that engaged on that point as well. I mean, to your point, you were able to talk to the author. We were able to go talk to all the members of that committee pretty quickly and give them examples, again, of the locals in their district that had already met and conferred and had a process in place that were going to be stripped if this bill were to move forward. There was no exception as it was, proposed at the time for any of those local, whether they were vaccine mandates or vaccine or test mandates or no mandate at all. It didn't take into account any of those things that had already been bargained locally. And also, like I said, just the precedent setting of going forward and kind of the idea that we fight as a labor union for local collective bargaining every single day. And if this were to move forward, what would be coming next and how easy it would be to kind of chip away at collective bargaining. I think it was just really being able to focus on the policy impact that the proposal would have had, and then your relationships and your ability to talk to the author and talk to the members of that committee on those points.
And I think the only thing I would add is that you and the executive board kind of set up a clear policy that through all the pandemic, I mean, so much we haven't ever seen before, that we were going to protect the members' rights to, collectively bargain, to meet and confer over the impacts and effects of changes in their working conditions or the contract. And kind of that we were consistent on that. And we talked to a lot of people, a lot of legislators about those issues. And obviously our locals, engaged their local employers and had agreements. And I think a lot of that work that was done through the pandemic, a lot of engagement that our locals had in talking to each other and talking to you and just kind of really set the stage to help us push back on something that would have undermined their rights to bargain. And I think you said it at the outset of this podcast, Brian, part of it is what the laws can set up the structure of how our members can go bargain at the table. And we constantly are, you're constantly ensuring that we work to protect those rights.
It's so interesting in how intricate the job is and ushering or nurturing a bill through the system. And, kind of on the day-to-day stuff, you guys do and see things on a day-to-day basis that if you're not there doing the job, you really don't know. Talk to us a little bit about, some of the partnerships that get formed, some that get stressed, how that works. Tell me about some of your experiences within the Capitol doing the work of being an advocate.
Yeah, I think, it's really interesting. I think there's a group for everyone and everything. And we really pride ourselves on maintaining our strong relationships. And it starts with you, with having strong relationships with our brothers and sisters in other unions at the leadership level. And then, on the kind of advocate level, we work with our fellow counterparts at different unions every day. And we really try to, whether it's before a bill is introduced or after a bill is introduced, we always try to engage those partners to understand, this is what we need to get done to protect firefighters in California. How can we work with you to achieve that in a way that doesn't negatively impact anyone or helps our fellow workers at other organizations. And that partnership and dialogue is just so important, because one of the things you never want to have happen is to, surprise some of the stakeholders we work with every day. And the other thing is when you've educated a legislator on an issue and they're going to take on a bill, the last thing you want them to do is be surprised by opposition from, someone they didn't expect or from another friend. And so it's really important to have that dialogue and discussion and really have relationships with every type of stakeholder. And I would say that it goes to not just, other labor organizations, but also having, dialogue and maybe we don't always agree with folks that are, work on other issues that we work on, whether it's, organizations that represent local government employers or organizations that represent like workers' compensation interests. But trying to maintain open dialogue, even if you're going to disagree with those folks, is important, because sometimes you hear things that say, oh, maybe we can, reach an end without having to disagree. And so I think it's just, that's really, really important to just kind of have that open dialogue and constantly be talking to folks and meeting with folks to really understand where they are.
How important is it for you as our day-to-day advocates in the Capitol to have local union leadership and members answer the call when you put it out for them to either testify or be present? I'll start with you, Meagan. How important is that?
It is the most important, I think, for our day-to-day engagement on the behalf of you and behalf of all the members. I think I've mentioned a couple times, even just in this conversation, the ability to pull locals into conversations, into hearings, pull their examples, be able to present them to their local elected official. all politics are local. I feel like I use this term and it's kind of cheesy, but it is so true. And I think that carries in our statewide legislation conversations here, being able to localize it for the state elected officials. And I think that is one of the most beneficial things I've noticed in my years working on behalf of CPF is the ability for this organization to personalize those relationships locally at the local union level. Most of the elected officials that we get here in Sacramento were elected to a local city council, a water board, a fire board, something locally first. And so they knew our local president and our local leadership first, and that's who makes the connection to us and makes the connection to our amazing political department and Shonda Wesley and Christine Harms, and they sort of hand them off to us at some point to meet. And so it really is cultivating those relationships locally with the local union. That translates into CPF. They feel like they know us by the time they get here already. And so our ability to go in and meet with them on a specific issue and say, your local union president, give him or her a call, ask them about this. And they take their calls. Our locals are amazing. Anytime we call, text, can you call a legislator? Can you call this person? Oh yeah, sure. No, I had dinner with them last night. Like, it is amazing. And I honestly, I know, this is part of the work of any statewide union, but I have yet to see the impact of it at the level I've seen CPF be able to kind of translate it and our locals be able to translate it into the work we do here at the state level. So I just think it is how we do our job, those local relationships, being able to translate for us up here in Sacramento.
No one tells the story or the experience better than the firefighter that's been through it. So whether it's a firefighter themselves or their member that's been through workers' comp, or a president who's defended their member in a hearing, or a member who has been, on a wildfire or in a structure fire or at an EMS incident, we really take everything that our members are telling us and describing and help translate it for legislators day to day. But it's different when you can talk about the experience and the scene or the event that a local leader was on. And, we're just really honored to work on behalf of the men and women of the fire service that, do an amazing job every day and really step up when we know that their activities as it relates to their local are often are almost always in addition to their everyday job as a firefighter. And it's really, we're really lucky to just have people that are so committed to the men and women of the fire service.
I'm with both of you guys, and Meagan, what you said about our legislators take members' calls or the local president, and that is so true. And Doug, I've been in there. I've actually been through testimony with both of you, but even as a 30-year firefighter, and I've testified as a firefighter, nothing grounds me more than sitting next to Magali, Lieutenant Sadie, or Trevor Walsh at a CalPERS. And was it Trevor? I think it was. I don't remember. I've done enough of them, but when you sit with a uniformed member and they are telling the story of what is happening, there is nothing more compelling or powerful than that. And the interesting part on the issues that we battle, we don't find, that 1 in a million that had this experience. All you have to do is put a phone call out to locals, and we'll end up with a dozen, contact any one of these folks and hear their story. So that's what really satisfies me, that when we put a call out, when you guys put a call out for an issue, whether it's workers' comp, COVID, any kind of a presumptive, cancer, working conditions, the number of responses we get back of willingness to testify, that even tells us more as a team, we're on the right track with this issue. It's not just a one-off, it's an issue. And I think with that, I'm going to start to close up. Doug, Meagan, is there anything that either of you would like to add before I close this up?
Just thanks for having us, Brian. This was my first podcast, so I had fun.
I thank you guys for being there. Doug, anything from you?
Thanks, Brian. I just, it's an honor to work on behalf of all 30,000 CPF members. And I just wanted to flag for everybody that the legislative conference is coming up in May of 2023. And just, it's so important that you come up to Sacramento if you can and share your voice and perspective with legislators in the Capitol. A lot of new folks being elected, and it should be a really great event. So just thank you for having us today.
And I think that those of you that are listening, you have a little bit of a sense of why we think our advocates are the best in the business. And Doug and Meagan, I just want to thank you for taking the time to join us today. Thank you. And Brittany and Alyssa, the rest of your team. And your team is pretty big because at any one time, any one of us are a member of that team. And I just truly want to thank you, Doug and Meagan, for your leadership, your counsel, your guidance, and your ability to really see everything. It's priceless, and it's priceless for us as the men and women of the fire service. And we are truly blessed to have you as our advocate. So with that, I want to thank everyone for listening, and I hope you'll join us again soon on the CPF Fire Wire. Thanks all. We're out.
You can find CPF Fire Wire at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, or wherever you find podcasts. Be sure to subscribe so you'll never miss an episode. You can also find CPF Fire Wire at the CPF website, www.cpf.org, and on the CPF YouTube page. We're always interested in getting your feedback, comments, and criticism. Tell us what you'd like to hear about. Drop us a line, info@cpf.org. CPF Firewire is a production of California Professional Firefighters. Our producer is Carol Wills. Our engineer is Matt McDermott. Please join us next month for another edition of CPF Firewire.